Hey and welcome, I'm Hammy, and today we'll be taking a look at Overwatch's 19th comic, London Calling Part 3, in which we learn loads of things about Overwatch, Tracer and her life after Overwatch in London, including background behind the events of Widowmaker's Alive short, Omnic Lore and much more. Now this is part 3 of a 5-part series, so for parts 1 and 2, check the description and my playlist and videos here, then come back. I'll be going through all of the Overwatch lore talking points and interesting bits of the comic, along with a little light speculation on what new Overwatch story and lore we may have learned from it too. Suffice to say, this contains total spoilers for the comic, so the link is in the description below if you haven't read it already, or head to playoverwatch.com to check it out. Please read it first, come back, let me know your thoughts, and as always, timecodes are in the description below if you want to skip around to different topics. First things first, a quick summary of the story, timecode in the description as always if you want to skip too. In the aftermath of Mondata's death, Tracer reflects on whether she should try to understand people who create chaos rather than stop it, and how and why Widowmaker might have been involved. As news networks rush to cover the death of the Shambali leader, Tracer agonises over whether she was at fault for his death. As Iggy the Omnic and her friends look on, Iggy's shock turns to anger, and she wonders and gets angry at Tracer and humans who she believes to be responsible for Mondata's death, in spite of the efforts of her friend Lady to give her both sides of what may have happened. Case, in the Omnic underworld, is stirring up anti-human sentiments, and Iggy is drawn to his rhetoric and speeches as Case says some very dangerous things. Case then leads the Omnics into King's Row in protest, and when special ops are called, Emily sees this on the news and Tracer rushes to help, although she's not repaired her chronal accelerator. Tensions are rising at the protest with lines drawn. The police attempt to disperse the crowd with a sonic pulse weapon, hurting humans and Omnics alike. With Case urging the crowd on to violence in return, Lady blocks the second sonic blast to protect others, and sadly dies in the process. At a funeral for Lady in the underworld, Iggy performs a ceremonial welding of part of Lady onto her, a way in which Omnics remember the departed. While Iggy mourns and is a bit calmer, Case arrives, and Stokes, Omnic feeling around, accuses Tracer of having taken a side, says that she's one of them and an Overwatch soldier who killed Omnics, and ejects her from the underworld. As Tracer realises an Omnic crisis is starting all over again, her accelerator malfunctions, and as she struggles, a mysterious Omnic stands over her. Here's some of the interesting things I enjoyed from the comic and analysis of all of the details too. Well, this was a middle comic in a series of 5, so we're well into the middle of the plot before the denouement and the end is going to start building up, but we did get some interesting things, such as a little bit about Tracer and her past. We know that Tracer's dad was probably a military man. A soldier must know her enemy, is something that he said to Tracer. She doesn't understand those who create chaos and wonders deep down if her understanding the other side of things will help. She says it's kind of the centre of everything. Now, in Tracer's voice lines we've heard her attitude and sort of feelings about Mondata and his death. And as she sits injured in her lounge with Emily having a look at parts that have come through, trying to work out what's needed to repair her accelerator, we can see where this feeling has come from. And in addition to not being able to save Mondata, Tracer is also not quite able to save Lady in this comic too, although Lady somewhat puts herself in harm's way. Next up, we do get a few details as to the wider Overwatch universe. Tracer at the beginning, reeling after the attack, is not 100% sure why Widow would kill Mondata, and whether she was hired, and by who. Although she does mention later on in the comic that if Widow was hired by Talon, or if Widow was working for Talon, Talon aren't the only ones responsible for this chaos, but this is the chaos Talon wants. So acknowledging and suggesting that although Talon could certainly benefit from this kind of chaos, maybe it's not the only reason, as well as the historic reasons and unrest that she's mentioned before, why this is happening. And indeed, I think we'll probably see that in Overwatch 2. We do get a look at various different news stations in the Overwatch universe. I find it interesting that there's an Omnic newscaster amongst the many different perspectives, and one such channel for news is reporting that ex-Overwatch agent Tracer was there. Former members of Overwatch, indeed, was the line, even though we know there was only one in Tracer. So in the chaos and the confusion, maybe a bit of misinformation being spread already there. We do see a little bit of detail on Tracer's chronal accelerator, on Winston sending her regular parts. It's the only thing that keeps her from blinking out of existence again, and that Tracer is missing him. Thirdly, we see more about Omnic law and Omnic-human relations again, and this is a big component of London Calling. Now, there's certainly a downturn in relations, obviously, following the assassination of Mundata. The news and the human news are describing him as a major figure in the fight for equality, the assassination as being a tragic assassination, and saying that he spread a message of peace and harmony. Now, I do find it interesting, art-wise, the expression on the Omnic newscaster looks a little angry to me, understandably, and the phrasing of the Omnic newscaster's report. Mundata died surrounded by security while standing only inches from his armed vehicle. Now that is factual, but coupled with the Omnic newscasters, what I think is their expression is very much sort of a, why did this happen? So certainly, maybe not conspiracy theorising, but certainly incredulous at how this could have happened. We then see Iggy, who was there, who saw Tracer blink out of the way, say a human killed him, they killed him, someone killed him, and Tracer let them. Even though Lady, her friend, is trying to be the voice of reason, saying they should find Tracer and see what happened from her perspective. Now, hearing Case's speech, we actually see that Iggy's mood doesn't change, and this all follows into the riot, where we see, actually interestingly, that Onyx can be destroyed in a sense, not through conventional weaponry, this sonic pulse weapon. Now, Lady, of course, gets right up in the face of one and takes the full brunt of one, but this is clearly a way that, although, you know, the physical body of the Omnic is intact, it seems like she's gone, she's passed away, she's dead. Her essence of herself, whether you want to call it a soul or circuitry or programming, is gone. And it's interesting to see an Omnic right at Lady's funeral, when one of us ceases to be, a part of us ceases to be, says Iggy in Requiem as she contemplates Lady's death. We then see the custom of welding a part of a past Omnic onto a new one, so they are remembered, so they live on. And indeed, Iggy says to Tracer, "You don't understand. When one of you is gone, another comes into the world. We are all we have." Now, I find this interesting on Omnic lore. Omnic consciousness, we've seen in the recent Symmetra story, talking with Zenyatta, sort of reflections on that. We then see a very practical element of it here. It isn't something that seemingly either can be created or shared, or is allowed to be created or shared. Omnics don't seem to, as people have sort of talked about before, back up their memories, back up their consciousness. It's been talked about a few times. Maybe Omnics aren't allowed to recreate themselves, or maybe they can't create themselves. There are more questions as to what Omnics can actually do in the Overwatch world that this raises, but it does seem that when an Omnic is gone, whether it's by their own choice or whether it's just by a forced situation, they are gone. Now, that's interesting lore-wise. It explains why Omnics feel they have a soul as much as anyone or indeed anything else in the Overwatch world, and it does beg the question as to how this is the case practically, but it seems that whether they choose it or whether it's forced on them, Omnics are individuals. Comparing this to what very much seems to be the hive mind, the hive networked mind, maybe a sort of networked kind of joint AI of the Omnics operating in the Omnic crisis, and whatever Omnic enlightenment was that we indeed saw caused or rumoured to be caused by Aurora in the events of Symmetra's short story with Zenyatta recently. More depth into Omnic lore there, and I really appreciate it. Now, it does remind me a bit of, indeed, the Forsaken in the World of Warcraft. Now, that is a very long story for another time, but if you're not familiar with World of Warcraft or Warcraft lore, the Forsaken were undead under the control of the Lich King. A bunch of them managed to break free of the Lich King's will. They are led indeed by Lady Sylvanas Windrunner, and for quite a long time she was concerned with how they would continue as a people, due to the fact that, very much like the Omnics, for a while, when they passed away, there was indeed no bringing them back, as it were. Now, indeed, Sylvanas found a way to remedy that, and she's currently causing a lot of trouble in World of Warcraft's latest expansion, Shadowlands. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, we can certainly talk about it here another time. Fourthly, I found it very interesting to look at not only Case's rhetoric, but the explanation and background behind the growing Omnic anger. Now, if indeed this Omnic crisis is caused by many different factors, then Case in King's Row is certainly one. His speech reminds me very much of that of demagogues and dictators, indeed of the dangerous, very dangerous kind, as history has taught us. Case is saying, they are afraid of us, they oppress us, they can't control us, they want to destroy us. And the last bit is particularly chilling for me, echoes to me of indeed the 1930s and 1940s, We are the enlightened. We are the future, not them. We will not be kept down by inferiors. We have learnt about dictators talking in that kind of way, believing that they as a kind are superior to others. Now, driving the Omnics on in the fight, and after the funeral, we see that Case is very much stoking the flames, wishing to push the confrontation. Even though Iggy is calmed and kind of sad and reflecting after the funeral, Case comes in, stokes things again, and kicks Tracer out. His language towards Tracer is very much focused on Overwatch soldier, stereotyping her as killing Omnics, even though Tracer says, "I did it for Mundata's freedom." And Case then sort of says, and creates this them and us mentality. Again, very, very dangerous stuff. If Case is indeed an advocate of this kind of feeling and thought in King's Row, then he is probably not the only one, and this is sort of a microcosm, as it were, of maybe feelings that Onyx have elsewhere in the world. Maybe not Numbani, where Onyx and humans live in more harmony than certainly the rest of the world by the sounds of things, but Case can't be the only one, so this is an interesting look into how Omnics might be feeling elsewhere in the Overwatch world also. And last but not least, well, what's going to be happening next? Well, the blurb for the next comic says Tracer struggles to plan her next move after a friend patches up her chronal accelerator in the underworld. Now, Tracer at the end of this comic, when she's struggling with her chronal accelerator, is overlooked by a mysterious, well, Omnic it looks like to me. Who could that be? Who is the friend patching up her chronal accelerator? Going to be interesting to see who shows up here. And an assassination attempt is made on Case, further fueling the Omnic rebellion. Well, 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 I wonder what's going to happen there. Who's going to try and assassinate Case? Now, it would be very Talon to try to kill Mondata and then to try and kill Case, wouldn't it? That's all I'm saying. What would stoke Omnic human tensions more than to kill someone on both sides, or kill another Omnic, as it were? Let's see what happens. Thanks very much for tuning into this analysis of Overwatch's third London Calling comic. If you liked the video, hit the like button below, subscribe and comment. It all really, really helps me out. I know it's cliche, but it helps people see the video, so thank you. Do let me know what you thought of the story and what you'd like to see happen next in the next comics coming up soon. Now, I've actually analysed all Overwatch comics, shorts, lore, animated videos and more, so if you would like to see more about the world of Overwatch, do check out the playlists here, where I've been covering Overwatch lore and story and the world around it ever since it was announced at BlizzCon over 5 years ago. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammy. Take it easy.